All right, and there it is. Credits! Terranigma has been conquered. Alrighty. Get my thoughts here. I do have thoughts written down. It's probably not as much as I would have liked. I think there has been many opportunities for me to write down more thoughts, and I just kind of forgot. So, yeah, here we are. Terranigma has been defeated. It took, I'm going to say it took a lot longer than I was expecting. I think the estimate for this game was like 18 hours. And I was expecting to beat this game in 3-4 streams max. And I've streamed the game for about 25 hours. Today's stream is about 2.5 hours. You know, minus some starting soon screen shenanigans and things like that. This game was a lot longer than anticipated. So that was, you know, a surprise, I suppose. Getting more game for my buck, in, I guess, a manner of speaking. My overall thoughts, it might be, I think ripping off the Band-Aid is probably just best. I'm not that much of a fan of this game. It's one of those scenarios where if I played this when I was 7 years old or 10 years old or something like that, I would be like absolutely compelled and knowing all the cool stuff that I could do and all the characters that I could talk to, and I could grind and I could do this and I could do that. I would be attached to all of those things. But in today's day and age, I've grown out of games like this. And part of me feels like the lack of nostalgia that I have for this game is allowed me to view it for its like purest form, I suppose. But I also have to take into account that this type of game is not necessarily my type of game. These kind of action RPGs that are, I don't want to say reminiscent of Zelda, but can remind you of like a Zelda environment and whatnot. So, yeah, I would definitely say that this is just not the. I don't necessarily want to say that it's not the game for me, but I also don't want to say that it's. I guess it's just not my style, I suppose. Kind of hard to be nostalgic for a game that never came out in America? Well, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. You know, what if I was born in Europe and I played this game in Europe? What if I had a imported SNES? You know, like there's a lot of scenarios where people could have played this game and had nostalgia for it and played it when it came out. You know, I happen to be, you know, not in that camp though. Story, was it satisfying? I'm gonna say no on this one. I feel like there was a lot to be desired for the story. I wanted more out of it. And I know this is kind of crazy to say because this is an SNES game, you know, like the story that you got is about as good as the story is gonna get. But there are some SNES games out there that I think push story further than how this game's story was pushed. And so I guess I just kind of wanted more out of it. I wanted more elaboration. I wanted more emphasis put on certain spots. I guess I wanted it to be more story focused rather than more, action focused, I suppose. And that's probably just the flip of the coin that you get with some games. Did it feel complete? I think I probably have to say yes. I don't necessarily know if there's any lingering threads that I feel need to be answered, but I guess there's just some weird things that happened in the story that I would like clarification on. Like, if we were created by Dark Gaia, why would the, I guess, like, the dark side of Ark on the surface world, like, team up with us? I just need a little bit more elaboration. Like, I can think of scenarios where that would work out, but I wish the game would just clarify that a little bit. How was the pacing? I guess the pacing was okay. There were some major stumbles. The freaking penguin. The penguin was absolutely, positively one of the worst things in this game for me. How was I supposed to remember that? I have no idea. Also, why is Ellie in the Stockholm right now? I was gonna say it's gonna be Royd, isn't it? The Suckafu. In the end. Thoughts on the story? Less than 10 hours into the game, and the story just feels non-existent. Go through a door that's never supposed to be opened, fight in some towers to save the village, then go out into the new world just because you should save the world. Yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of like proper motivation, I suppose. I didn't feel granted, like, this is what I would expect out of an SNES game, so it's not that I'm disappointed, but like, for my own personal taste, I just want a little bit more motivation, a little bit more reason to do the things that we're doing. And this evolves into running around the world at the behest of some mysterious voice, bringing the world back to life. Doesn't feel cohesive. Yeah, I guess just the journey as a whole doesn't feel like it has much purpose for the majority of the game. And it doesn't feel like a story is necessarily progressing as the game is going on. We're not getting new developments as the story is going on. It's just kind of like we're hitting certain spots of how to move the game forward. And it's only towards like the very end where you start getting plot development. The twists start coming into fruition and you start learning things. And that particular type of storytelling, which is prevalent in a lot of games nowadays, where you go through a lot of shenanigans for the first 70% of the game, and the last 30% of the game is just like, here's your story, here's your plot twist, here's everything that you need to know. I'm not necessarily a fan of that style. The twist that the Elder and Yomi and Ellie betrayed Ark didn't feel as fleshed out as I would have liked. Yeah, I wish they could have set this up a little differently. The baby scene, I'm still kind of confused about. Was that a flashback? Was did Ark turn into a baby after merging with the Dark Ark? You know, I'm very confused as to the sequences that those events took place in. And yeah. And if it like was the past, then that just brings up more questions than answers, to be fair. But then again, if it was in the present time, that just brings even more. It is basically only us Germans that tend to be nostalgic about it. It's kind of big here. Okay. You could visit the Elder after reviving humans? Really? Ark died and was kind of reborn as Light Ark. But yeah, it's not very clear. So when Chapter 4 happened, the subtitle was The Resurrection of the Hero. But yeah, I didn't get that at all. So essentially, well, that just makes things even more confusing. Let's just say Ellie was 15 years old when the game started. So Ark was like 15 years old. For the purposes of discussion, let's just say that only months went by before Ark dies and is reborn. For Ark to be a child and then get back up to 15 years old, there's no way that Ellie is still hanging around just like, yeah, I'm 30 years old now and I'm still doing the exact same thing that I was doing before. I'm very confused. I didn't feel like anything changed in that regard. That's very confusing. I'm now more confused. More often than not, I'm not a fan of wander aimlessly to progress. This is another thing that's very common in kind of, like these old school games where you get your line of dialogue that's supposed to tell you where to go, and sometimes they don't repeat that line of dialogue. So you have to write it down, you have to remember, or you have to stream the game or something like that. But the game, I guess, doesn't take into account that you might forget, or you might go off and do something else, and suddenly, it's like, oh, what was I supposed to do again? And I think that's probably one of my biggest criticisms of older style games, is that I'm going to use the charged term here, but they don't hold your hand enough. I think there's a minimum that a game should hold your hand, and I don't think this game is quite there yet. There are some moments where you can get that level, but there's also a lot of moments, like, for example, the penguin, where you can't. Although granted, I mean, if I went back and talked to that flower girl and it was like, oh, you're talking to me about penguins and flowers, then maybe. But I also have like -2 reasons to go back and talk to that flower girl. So it would have been one of those cases where I would either have to look it up, or I'd have to go to literally every town, maybe even every dungeon, to look for something that I missed. And that's where games collapse for me. Let's see. What was the reason Ark turned into a baby after gaining a shadow self? Well, we just got the answer for that one. He died. He did. You were always under the impression that Underworld never aged, while the Overworld, thousands of years passed. So there were many instances where the Overworld was progressing very quickly, and I was definitely confused by that. There were scenarios where they introduced technology, like Baruga's technology, the cameras, the lasers and things like that. None of that stuff basically exists anywhere else except for Baruga's, I guess, machinery or what have you. And so to kind of reach the final sequence of the game and have these characters that should see this type of technology and view it as something alien, they're like, oh yeah, I'll just disable that security camera, and oh yeah, I'll just ride my skateboard past all of these lasers and turn them off. It wasn't very believable, I guess. I don't know. I guess there's a lot of disconnects with how they age the characters in the world, but don't address that anywhere. At least the places that I've been and the characters that I've talked to. It's possible they do address that somewhere. For gameplay mechanics and design, what gameplay elements stand out? Ark isn't a silent protagonist. Holy cow. Can you believe it? This might be the first SNES game that I have played that I can think of off the top of my head that doesn't have a silent protagonist. And that's amazing. I couldn't believe it. I love it so much. Magic being consumables is not very fun. Basically makes me never want to interact with the system. I don't like the magic system at all. I tested it out once and then I accidentally used it again, I believe. So I used it technically twice. And then there were two scenarios where I actually wanted to use magic. In the robot fight that took me like 2 hours to beat, I wanted to use, there was one that regenerates my HP, and I don't remember which one it was, but I wanted to use that one. But you can't use Magirocks here. Well, suckafoo, I guess I'm not doing that. Final boss fight comes around. I'm like, I want to use that regenerate HP Magirock thing. Nope, can't do that either. I'm 2 for 2 not being able to use magic on bosses, which makes me think that you can't use magic on bosses. And if you can't use magic on bosses, what the heck is magic good for? It's a limited resource and you can't use it on bosses? That's insane. It's absolutely insane. What is going on? How the menu system in general is utilized is interesting at first, but quickly becomes tedious. It gets worse because there's little information to be gained there. The most beneficial information is equipment stat changes and how many consumable items are remaining. At first I was like, this menu system is kind of neat. You go over here to equip your armor, you go over here to equip your weapons, you go over here to view your items, you go over here to view various other things. But as time went on, it just became a little cumbersome to navigate to. Sometimes I would go to the wrong page. I'd have to wait for animations to play out before I could move to other items. You have to wait for your HP to move up a certain amount before you can input another action or command or button press. There's information on that screen, like how many consumables you have left, that are not available when you're just like out in the overworld. And I feel like that would have been very important information to have. You know, if I only have one large bulb left, I'd like to know that without having to go into my menu. So while I do appreciate the different type and the different like look and the different type of implementation that the menu was, I think I would just prefer a standard menu that is a little quicker pace and, you know, didn't have all the bells and whistles, I suppose. The speedrunners use magic in like one instance, if you remember correctly. Well, that I guess that's kind of helpful, maybe. Having different types of attacks is cool and provides some nice variety, but ground enemies and flying enemies are very annoying to fight. Yeah, I liked that there were different types of attacks. I even like that certain enemies required you to utilize different types of attacks in order to take advantage of, you know, how to kill them best. It was cool that you have like this stab, and then you have this rapid stab, and then you have like a jump attack, and then you have this like slide attack, and then you have this dash attack. It's cool. It adds a nice little bit of variety, and it allows you to kind of mix up your gameplay when it's necessary. With that said, the slide attack felt very inconsistent for me. It feels like there were instances where I would use the slide and I'd take damage and the enemy wouldn't take damage. There were just, sometimes it was so obnoxious to use those types of attacks. Meanwhile, like the dash attack felt very strong. Probably the strongest attack in this game. Made you invincible for a little while. You know, it used momentum from your running. It just felt very, very useful, and it might be my most used attack if that was ever a thing. Future me, I do not recommend counting that. That sounds like a horrible idea. Try not doing that. Let's see. You know what? And I have to also mention that the whole flying enemy thing. I see where they were going with that, and I get that. You know, like, yeah, we have these flying enemies. The problem with flying enemies is if I have to sit here and wait for you to come down, I'm spending more time waiting to participate in the fight than I am actually participating in the fight. And the fact that the final boss was a flying enemy just made it that much more obnoxious. Now, I don't know if I beat, like, I don't know if the strategy of me turning away from the boss was actually making it come down so that I could attack it. It seemed very interesting that was occurring, and it makes me think that that's possibly the way to beat it. But if it's not, then I guess I just got really lucky with some randomness. The old school design of you should go here next, and then the game never reminds you or tells you that information again, is what I truly despise about old school games. I mentioned this already. It's just something that I'll never really get behind. For combat, there are interactions with enemies that make combat really frustrating. After certain actions, enemies can damage you before you can act. For example, if I go into the menu and eat a bulb, The invincibility runs out, and I will take damage before I can jump, attack, or move. This also happens when you have a bulb equipped and you decide to use it. You have a brief amount of invincibility when you're eating it, but then you're just kind of like stuck there while an animation is playing out that he's like throwing up or something like that. And you can take damage. It's so insane. Like, it's not safe to recover HP without going into the menu. And that's kind of crazy to me. I don't know why they did it that way. Running into enemies deals damage to you. This is never something that I will ever be a fan of. It just doesn't, like, I could see it making some sense, if you're like the spike ball monster and, run into you and you take damage. But I'm never really a fan of just taking damage for running into enemies. And this is very ubiquitous in a lot of games. And I wish they would just do away with that. That enemy should have to attack me to do damage. I don't see the enemy taking damage when they run into me. So what's going on? Certain attacks into enemies make it so that you're guaranteed to take damage, such as the run attack if you're too close. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier as well, but some attacks are just not safe if you use them at certain points. Not in the sense of like, oh, I got punished, but in the sense of, like the enemy can act before I do, or I just take damage because my attack happens to be in the hitbox of touching the enemy, and then I take damage. There's even some instances where I don't do damage to the enemy, but the enemy does damage to me. There's some inconsistencies there and some consistencies that really wear down the combat for me. Enemies at the top and bottom of things you climb, such as vines, ropes, or ladders, they can still hit you, knock you down, and you're just screwed. This in particular happened in the Snowy Mountain area. There was this, at the top of a ladder, there was a crystal guy with little crystals rotating around it, and that enemy should just there should never be enemies on top of ladders, especially when they can knock you down and just deal damage to you for free. Like that's messed up. Greatly messed up. Then there's the situation where climbing down a ladder, there's those like spear tribal dudes that can confuse you. That in of itself was also a nightmare to deal with, and glad to be past that. Thankfully, it seems like those scenarios were pretty infrequent, but in my opinion, they should have been there in the first place. Enemies can trap you against walls, forcing you to continually take damage. Remember when I was in that one cave with the little eyeball guy, and it was this tiny little room, and I was just trying to get past, and all of a sudden, like, I find myself cornered, and I can't knock the enemy away, but the enemy's like right on top of me, so he's just constantly doing damage to me, and I can't attack it to deal damage back to it. Like, that stuff should never happen. Most of the time it was in these tiny little rooms, but that stuff is so frustrating. Give me some invincibility when I get hit so that I can actually move through enemies. Basically like enemies can do to me. Let's see. For dungeons, Luran, the zombie town, was extremely obnoxious. Had maze qualities, annoying enemies, and tight places. By far, the most annoying dungeon of them all, I think. Yeah, that one was rough. And also basically any room with little room to maneuver, because enemies are charging you down. Enemies get a lot of benefits, and Arc not so much. For Cardinal Sins, there's an escort mission in this game. I don't remember what the escort. Oh, it was Lean, the little kid tiger. Yeah, I escort missions are a no. For miscellaneous sound and music, I say the music was pretty solid in this game. I have plans to listen to it, or listen to the soundtrack after I beat this game. Or I had plans, so now I can implement those plans to listen to the soundtrack. I don't think there were any tracks necessarily that I was particularly drawn to while playing the game, but there were some tracks that interested, or like I had interest in, so I'm definitely curious to see if those hold up outside of the game versus, while playing the game. For graphics, there are some cool aspects that I've never seen before for a Super Nintendo game, like the world map effect at the beginning. I feel like there were some really nice elements in this game. As a matter of fact, like the pixel art in this game was actually pretty solid as well. The flying fortress for Baruga, like there was some really cool stuff going on there. Reminded me a lot of like a Metal Slug game with just how they approached it. So I was kind of impressed by how good the game looked, and some of the experimental qualities that were also present in the game. For replay value, does the game offer additional story content on a second playthrough to warrant playing the game again, like Fire Emblem Three Houses? I doubt it. Is the game worth recommending? This one's interesting, isn't it? I think I could see people liking a game like this. So I could see myself recommending this to certain people. But if someone was like me, I would not recommend this game to them. I don't think there's much. This is going to sound so disrespectful. I don't think there's much value in playing this game. I don't think playing this game will allow you to come away from it feeling like a sense of accomplishment, or feeling a different way about like video games in general. I don't feel like the story is going to be something that someone would latch on to very well, and I don't think the gameplay is necessarily going to make them feel good, I suppose. But I mean, old school games, at least from my perspective, are typically going to be that way. It's just how those games were designed back then, and there's a lot of reasons for that, whether it's be limitations or time spent working on the game, or just the style of game that they wanted to create. It's how the different eras of video games and how they shape other eras, it's how it works. Would I play the game again, whether immediately, near future, or distant future? No. If the developer is watching, one thing that I didn't mention at all is I had a lot of people both suggest and outright say that I was underleveled while playing this game. And in the end, I was required to grind. I think I could have beat the final boss without grinding, but we'll just say that I was required to grind. And I think that was the wrong direction to go. I think that made this game a worse experience for me. But I don't think this game is by any means a poor game or a game that can't be enjoyed. If I didn't have if I didn't have any amount of fun while playing this game, I would have definitely set it down. It just wasn't. It wasn't my style of game. I knew that I wasn't going to be as attached to the gameplay of this game after just a couple of hours of seeing how it worked. So I guess I don't necessarily have much else to go off of. The story is what would have like brought this game to the forefront to make up for me not being much of a fan of the gameplay, and it didn't quite do that. After it's all said and done, I think I'm more confused than I thought I was, and that's a little tragic for me. But I think the game is solid. It's a decent game. It has solid mechanics. The story is probably something that I'm gonna need more clarification on, but I don't regret playing the game. You know, it's nice to play old school games every now and then and get an understanding of what people like in those games and what they see about those games and how those games have transformed other games that have come after it. So that's always fun. But that is going to wrap it up for me for today, as well as this particular thoughts video. So thanks for watching. Appreciate it. I'll be back Monday, 7 a.m. Pacific, to play something. We'll find out when we find out. I'm out. Peace.